Good morning. Hi, everyone. It's Simon from the Simon Westfall-Kwong Real Estate Group of Keller Williams. Thank you for joining us today for Lunch and Learn. We are here with Whitney Roddy, and she's from the Whitney Roddy Agency. And she's going to cover about 3 things you must know about homeowner and flood insurance. I'm going to let Whitney take the floor. Whitney, please introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Simon. My name is Whitney Roddy. I am 5th generation at the Roddy Insurance Agency. We are in Bloomfield, New Jersey. I am born and raised New Jersey. Insurance has basically been in my blood since I was born. I currently live in Hoboken, New Jersey with my husband and my French bulldog. So just a little bit about me. I want to thank Simon and his whole team for joining us today. This presentation really is for you guys. So I want this to be as interactive as possible. If you guys have questions that come up, feel free to cut me off, jump in, and we'll continue to go back and forth. But definitely feel free to jump in whenever you would like. So the reason that this presentation came up, because water has really always been a pretty big topic in the insurance industry. We've been talking about it for years. However, recently, it's also become a really hot topic for homeowners and for real estate agents in New Jersey, specifically after Hurricane Ida hit us. So it's something we're getting constant calls from our clients. And I'm going to put up a little presentation I've put together now, and we can start talking about it. Okay. So over the years, we've seen, especially with hurricanes, they're not just hitting the Southeast anymore, especially after Hurricane Sandy. This is something that us being in the Northeast and in New Jersey, we have to really be concerned about hurricanes, about flooding, about floodwaters, and really be knowledgeable about it now. So again, not just in the Southeast, this is a problem. So that leads us into our presentation. So what are 3 things to know about water? 3 things to know that we're going to discuss today are water backup, flood coverage, and just some coverage options. And this is really important for you guys as real estate agents to know, so you can explain it to any of your buyers, what the options are, what they should be talking to their insurance agent about, and obviously just know what can be covered and what can't be covered. There's a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to water in homes and insurance. So it's good to have just a general background so you can talk about it with your clients. So I'm sure we can all answer this question based on what I've talked about so far. So what is the #1 source of property damage? I know everyone's muted, so I'll answer. The answer is water. So I know you think that fire causes most damage. You think wind, hail, not true. Water has now become the #1 source of property damage across the US. There are different types of water damage. So if you look at the screen, I've listed some of the big ones on here. The top 3, pipe bursts, a leaky bathroom, plumbing that's leaking, or water coming in through a damaged roof. Those are all pretty straightforward in terms of insurance. If you have a homeowner policy, you should have coverage for those items. So I'm not going to focus on those today. The ones that we're going to focus on today are the bottom 3. So the bottom 3 are very, very, very strong ways that water gets into houses, and that's by water backup, flood, and surface water. So water just leaking into the house. And those are the 3 we're gonna focus on. All right. So the first one, and I know Simon was talking to me about this one earlier. There's a coverage called water backup. And when people call me and they say, I have water in my basement, am I covered? There's no simple answer. The question I have to them is, well, how did water get into the basement? And water backup is a coverage that can be endorsed onto your homeowner's insurance. So you don't need a separate policy for this. This is coverage that it's not automatic. It's not automatically going to be there. It's something that every person that has a basement or a finished basement should absolutely request. So what is this endorsement? What covers it? It'll basically cover two things. One, if your sump pump fails and water gets into the basement via the sump pump, it can fail because the power goes out. It can fail because it just stops working. It can fail because there's so much water that it just can't handle it. Whatever it happens, if that water gets into the basement as a result of sump pump failure, this is when the water backup coverage kicks in. The second way that this water backup coverage will kick in and be activated is if water backs up from pipes or drains into your house. So we see this a lot with bathrooms in basements. If a plumbing line fails, if a plumbing line gets clogged and water backs up into the house through a toilet, through a sink, through a clogged drain, whatever it is, the cleanup coverage is found through this water backup coverage. And this is, so if you hear people say that they have raw sewage in their basement, it happens, and this is the coverage they would need in order to have that covered by their insurance. So like I said, this isn't automatically on policies. For the most part, it has to be added separately. And we see companies offering as low as $1,000 of coverage. And then I have companies that offer up to the full policy limits. So there's essentially no limitation to what you can collect. But the main thing to note is that you need to either have a sump pump or a pipe or a drain. That's when this coverage kicks in, not just if you have a damp basement. So does anyone have questions on the water backup coverage for insurance at this time? Okay, so we will keep going and we will move on to flood. Flood can be very tricky. What I put up on the screen right now that you see is FEMA's definition of a flood. So just like the water backup coverage where it had to come from a pipe or it had to come from the sump pump, in order for a flood policy to kick in, you have to meet the definition of a flood. It's up on the screen, you can Google it. What I tell people, the main things that have to be met are either one, it has to be a body of water overflowing into your house. So that could mean if there's a pond, if there's a lake in the town, or if there's a creek or a stream running through the backyard, that would essentially have to overflow and come into the house. We did see that a lot during Hurricane Ida. So it does happen in New Jersey. The other definition of a flood that has to be met is 2 or more neighboring properties have to be inundated with water. So if it's just a heavy rainstorm and your basement gets wet, it's not considered a flood unless both you and a neighboring property are inundated with water. That's the definition by FEMA. So if you have clients that are in a flood zone or not, and they have a NFIP policy, so National Flood Insurance Program policy through FEMA, the only way that policy is going to respond is if a body of water overflows or if both you and your neighbor are essentially underwater. If those conditions are not met, you're not going to be covered. All right. So moving on to the policy that you can purchase for flood. This is the National Flood Insurance Program. It is through FEMA. The maximum coverage you can buy for your house is $250,000. There are companies that offer separate policies if you want more than that, but this is what a basic policy covers. You can also purchase up to $100,000 for contents. What most people don't understand about flood, FEMA and the National Flood Insurance Program will not cover contents in your basement. So even if you have that coverage on your policy, if your house floods and it meets the definition and you go through your insurance, if those contents that you're trying to collect were in your basement, there's not going to be coverage for them. If you move them to your first floor and it floods up to your first floor and they get ruined, then they would be covered. But if they were left in the basement, FEMA, NFIP is not going to cover them. The good thing is they do consider certain household items that are in your basement as part of the dwelling coverage. So you would have coverage for things like air conditioning units, furnaces, boilers, HVAC, electric outlets. So they do consider that as part of the dwelling coverage. So you would have coverage for that in your basement with the NFIP policy. Any questions on that so far? I know that was a lot.
So does it, Whitney, so does it matter if it's a sub pump? I don't know, you probably get covered this later, but is it with a sub pump failure versus a flood failure, would they cover the content? Like
with sump pump, yes. Okay. So with the water backup coverage, if you have, with the water backup coverage, whatever the limit is on your policy, that goes to anything. So it goes towards the cleanup, it goes towards the contents, it could go towards the dwelling amount, whatever it is, you have the limit and you can use the full limit however you want. FEMA, and I'm getting some questions in the chat about mold remediation and clean out. So with the water backup coverage, the cleanup is obviously covered. When it comes to mold and water backup, any mold damage is only going to be covered if the underlying claim was covered. So in order for homeowners insurance to cover mold, it has to cover what caused mold. So if your policy didn't have water backup coverage and that claim was excluded, and then you tried to put in for mold, that's also going to be excluded. You have to have that endorsement on there. FEMA does cover the pump out on their flood policies. They're not going to cover any future. The only thing aside from the actual building coverage and contents, if you have it, they will cover cost of compliance. So they're in a flood policy, there is $30,000 built. Like if you had to raise your house, for example, after Sandy, a lot of those homes at the beach did, and there's $30,000 to rebuild in compliance. So that would be covered. I'm just reading the chat. Will the sump pump failure trigger regular homeowners? Yes. If the water gets into your house because of a sump pump failure, your homeowner's policy will respond, but only if you have the endorsement. So that's not across the board. I see plenty of policies come across my desk where it's not included. It's something that we include on every policy that we write, but that's not an industry standard. And it does not matter why the sump pump failed. It like I said, it can be from the power going out. It can be because it just broke. It can be because there's too much water. But the bottom line is there's a pump and it failed. And that's how water got in. Okay, so those are all the questions in the chat. Thank you guys so much.
So one more, Whitney, on the sub pump, if it fails, it covers. Is there a maximum amount that would cover?
Yeah, so there is a maximum amount. It's going to depend on the individual policy. So there's certain companies that provide no limits. So they'll cover up to the policy limits. Those companies are going to be like the Chubb, AIG, Cincinnati. They all cover full policy limits. However, other policies that you see, you can buy coverages usually in increments of 5,000. So we see companies have 5,000, 10,000, pretty much up to 50,000 is the most you can purchase it if it's not automatically included. So it just very depends on what you chose for the coverage. It's relatively inexpensive. People are surprised at how inexpensive it is to add this, which is why we include it on everything that we write. All right. So I'll move on to our next slide. Other options. So as you guys can probably see between the two policies, there's gaps. There's not always going to be coverage for your basement, period. So seepage, for example, water just seeps into your house, into your basement. That doesn't meet either definition. So there's not going to be coverage for that. If your basement's just prone to getting wet on a rainy day, that doesn't meet either definition of those coverages. So there's not coverage for that. So the bottom line is you can't cover your basement for 100% of the things that are going to happen with water. I have clients that are calling me now saying, I have a finished basement, I need coverage for everything. And unfortunately, it just doesn't exist. However, with that said, there are some options in relation to flood that are not FEMA, that are not the NFIP. This is very new in the insurance industry. So we're still learning about this. We're having our first claims through these companies now, but it is, in my opinion, it can be a better option than FEMA. And this is private flood insurance. Now, private flood insurance, you can purchase whether you're in a flood zone or not. So you don't have to be in a flood zone, you can be in an X zone and you can buy these policies. So what's the benefit to using private flood versus FEMA? The benefit, first of all, you can buy more than $250,000 of coverage. So you can get a flood policy through private flood that covers the full value of your house, no limitation. For the most part, these also give you the $100,000 of contents. And the best part is most of these private flood policies will give you coverage for some contents in your basement. That's huge, since as we know, FEMA will not cover contents in your basement. So that's a big thing. Not only will they cover it, they'll give you replacement cost on your contents. So these are definitely advantages to working with a private carrier. The only drawback to working with one, depending on the type of loan you have, if you're in a flood zone and if flood insurance is required, you have to check with the mortgage company to make sure they will accept private flood. I have not had any issues with them accepting it personally, but I also have heard it really depends on the type of loan. So if you have a specialized loan, it might be an issue getting private flood. So that is another option for flood insurance and to get just a little bit more coverage for your basement and for a finished basement. And then the last option when it comes to flood insurance is actually an endorsement that you can get on your homeowner's insurance. Now, some insurance companies offer this and some do not. So if you're interested in having this, you will definitely have to contact your homeowner's insurance carrier and see if they'll add this. The benefits to this, it gives you full coverage for the value of your home. It's endorsed right onto your homeowners. You don't need a separate policy. It gives a broader definition of flood. So a lot of my carriers that offer this, they don't have the requirement that 2 neighboring properties be inundated with water. So if it's just your home, they would still cover it. So it's a much broader definition of flood. They give you much better coverage, higher limits. If you can't live in the house, they'll pay for you to live elsewhere. So it's not inexpensive, especially if you're in a flood zone, but it is, in my opinion, probably the best option if you are truly interested in flood insurance. And so these are just some examples on the right of what this policy would cover. And I'm just going to read. I have a question in the chat. Is flood insurance coverage dependent on having a sump pump or not? Flood insurance is not. Basically, it's 2 separate things. So if you have a flood, by definition, it's not going to be a sump pump failure. And if you have a sump pump failure, it's not going to meet the definition of a flood. So it's really, in terms of insurance, they're really 2 separate issues. So it makes no difference with flood if you have a sump pump. If it meets the definition of a flood and that water's in your house, then a flood policy responds. All right. And then I want to open the floor for some questions from you guys. See if anything is not clear or if you want me to focus on any of these topics or any other water related issues with homeowners insurance that you guys have seen?
So Whitney, some of our client may have a second home, like a lake house or a beach house or shore house, right? So obviously they will be the one doing the full coverage on the private flood insurance, pretty much.
Yes, I have a client who's closing on a beach house today down in Maniloking actually, and they opted for, they're in a flood zone. So I gave them, it's required by their mortgage company, they have to have flood insurance. So I gave them two options, and I gave them the regular FEMA policy, which provided the $250,000 of dwelling coverage. And then I also gave them a private flood quote, which covered the full value of the house at $850,000. And it also provided contents coverage. So they opted to go with the private flood insurance company. The mortgage company had no problem with that. And now they have full coverage on their home. So
and then doing, Hurricane Ida, I'm sure people are calling you nonstop and asking you what's covered, what's not covered. What are the most of the people think they cover, but they're not really are not covering?
Yeah, so what I say a lot, I always like when my clients call me before they put in a claim, because what you say to an insurance company it matters. So people have a lot of water in their basement. And bottom line is, how did that water get there? And what I tell people, if you have a sump pump, if you have French drains, if you have a bathroom in there, and you have water backup coverage, that's how you're getting coverage from Hurricane Ida. Unless you have a separate flood policy, which most people do not. A lot of these areas that flooded, they did not have separate flood policies. So what I tell people is, this is what you do have coverage for. So if it came in that way, that's what you, then yes, you have water backup coverage. If it came in through like surface water that comes in through the windows at the very top of your basement, if it just leaks into your house, if there was just too much water that it's coming in through windows, through the ground, there's no coverage for that. Every policy is going to exclude surface water, every policy. So the important thing to know is, okay, what would be covered? And in most cases with our clients, at least, it's covered through that water backup coverage. But unfortunately, there are cases with Ida where people have, if you don't have a sump pump and it's clear that water just came in through the top of the ground because there was so much water, a lot of those claims are going to be denied, unfortunately.
And then, you mentioned, there's all different, company does cover, like from, Chubb to, AIG to Finance Fund, all those. Are they all similar or one better than the other? So when you quote a quote for a client, you give them multiples and they pick one?
So if I'm quoting different homeowner carriers, I typically give one or two options. And like I said, the water backup limit is going to differ from company to company. So some of these companies just offer a blanket coverage with no limit, and certain companies, I always put in my proposals how much I'm quoting, and I make a note for the client. If they want more coverage than that, we can certainly discuss it. And that's how I would say 90% of the insurance carriers are going to be, you pick a limit. Most of the time, they're not just giving you full policy limits. So like I said, there's a handful of carriers out there that do, but for the most part, it's an important conversation to have when you guys are selling a house, when you guys are buying, working with someone to buy a house, make sure those buyers are asking their agents about that coverage, because it's very important and we see it all the time.
And then once you place a claim, does it matter if you go through the claim, it will stay on the record, and how long that can stay in the public record, people can check on it and see it, and that for the next person to buy a house, can they find out there's a claim on the property or not?
Yeah, so if there was a water backup claim or something paid through homeowners insurance, then yes, it's going to show up when the buyer is shopping for insurance, and it usually stays there for about 5 years. Most insurance companies, they'll look at it up to 3 years, but they'll know it was there up to 5 years. So if it was a very massive claim, they might, an insurance company might want more information about that. A paid flood claim does not show up on a homeowner policy, on a homeowner clue report. That would have to be done through flood. The owner would have to go through the flood department to see if there was any prior claims. But on homeowners insurance, it does show up. Like I said in the beginning of the presentation, water is the #1 cause of loss, and typically a home that has one water claim is more susceptible to having another one, unless the homeowner put in preventative measures so that it wouldn't happen again. So it's not a huge deal for the buyer. Most insurance companies will exclude a prior owner's loss, so it won't be chargeable. They won't hold it against them. However, if there's multiple water claims, it could definitely be an issue. Something like Hurricane Ida, I don't foresee that being an issue for home buyers or for sellers, just because, I mean, everyone in the state had water in their basement. I really don't think insurance companies are going to be holding that against every single house for the next 5 years. So people were calling me and saying, should I put in claims? Should I not? And my recommendation was to put it in, because I really don't think they're going to be penalized for that.
Can a carrier cancel your policy, I should say, if they put too many in? I mean, yes, Hurricane Ida is one situation, right? But then they could have a backup, they can have another thing. And then when an insurance company look at the overview claims, they say, well, there's too many claims within a year or two. Can they decide to cancel on you?
They can. So they can decide to cancel it. And then if we're shopping it around, if it's water claims, if it's all water claims, companies can deny giving water coverage. And again, water is the #1 cause of loss. So you don't want to get into a situation where you're getting denied water coverage. But yes, the general rule of thumb is 2 claims in a 3-year period. However, if one of those claims was a catastrophic claim, like Hurricane Ida was, we code them as CAT claims. That's what the insurance industry calls them. Those are not really looked at in terms of non-renewal, just because there was so much damage to a wide portion of the state. So I would be shocked if they got non-renewed for a Hurricane Ida claim. But if you just have 2 sewer backup losses in a year, that's going to be a problem. Any other questions?
So
I had
go ahead, Fabio.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of what Simon's been asking. Typically the insurance is more expensive if it is in a designated flood zone, but
Yes.
I guess because everything is changing, do you see like the non-flood zone insurance getting more expensive, or has that already happened, or
It already
not as easy
did.
to get?
So FEMA changed the rates effective 10/1. So if you wanted to get the NFIP policy through FEMA, yes, rates went up. If you were not in a flood zone, it was always, if it was your primary residence, you weren't in a flood zone, you wanted a preferred risk policy, it would cost you about $500 for the year. That's not the case anymore. I'm doing quotes for those homes now with FEMA, and they're coming in thousands of dollars for the year. So that's not the case anymore, which is why we really made an effort to align ourselves with some private flood options, especially if you're not in a flood zone. I think that the private options are really, really worth looking into. And for the most part, their cost is either for the same, if you're comparing apples to apples, the cost for private is less than what FEMA is.
And a kind of a follow-up. I've always had the opinion that questioning whether those separate additional policies are even worth it because there's so many loopholes and limitations and restrictions. What do you typically say to clients about that?
I mean, the big thing, and what I think a lot of people don't understand with flood is just the definition. If you have a true definition of a flood, the policy will respond like it's supposed to. So, again, people are calling me wanting flood insurance because their basement, gets water during a rainstorm. And, I have to realistically tell them you're not going to get coverage through a flood policy because you have a basement that's prone to getting wet. So it's always good for me to have a realistic conversation with the client about, okay, you can buy this policy, but in order for it to respond, here's what has to happen. And that's just a conversation that you really have to set expectations. And then again, if it's someone who's not in a flood zone, depending on their carrier, and they're really concerned about this, and they're really concerned about their basement and water, it's always worth seeing if their homeowner carrier offers the private flood endorsement onto a homeowner policy, because that's going to give them really the broadest type of flood coverage you could get. But yeah, you're going back to your original question. It really comes down to, your opinion of how expensive it is for you, and that's something that the homeowner has to answer for themselves. That's not something I can usually answer for them.
And then another question for you, Whitney. So let's say, during a storm, and then, there's lighting, and the lighting hit the tree, and the tree comes down on your house. Would that be covered, or is that because some may not cover because it's nature doing this thing?
So that's covered. So when a tree falls, if it's due to lightning, if it's due to wind, whatever it is, where the tree lands, that's who's responsible for it. So if your neighbor's tree falls on your house, it doesn't matter that it's your neighbor's tree. It's on your house. You're responsible for it, and your homeowner's insurance would cover that. And if it was raining and there was subsequent water damage in the house because this tree went through it, you're fully covered for that. The only time you would have, you don't see this much in this area, but some policies add on wind deductibles and hurricane deductibles, and that could get tricky with the deductible portion of it, but it's still covered. It would just might change your deductible around a little bit. But yeah, the trees falling we get those a lot, and it's always confusing, and it's always neighbors fighting each other about who's going to pay for it and who's cleaning it up and whatnot. But wherever your property line is, you can draw a line, and if it's on your property, it's your responsibility.
So if it's the neighbor tree fall on your property and damage your property, it's your responsibility, not the neighbor. So the neighbor.
Correct.
So your insurance company is not going to go after that neighbor to say, hey, you have to do something about this tree.
The only time that we've seen that happen, so your insurance company would cover you. So you put it in through your insurance company. The only time we've seen someone successfully subrogating against their neighbor is if they've sent them multiple certified letters stating that there is either a dead or a damaged tree and they want it to be removed, or branches, whatever it is. And if you've sent them, and basically you have to have documentation that you put them on warning, on notice, and documentation that they got it. That's kind of the only recourse you would have to go. And again, you would still go through your own homeowner's insurance. And then if you did those things, you would let your own carrier know, and they would go and subrogate against your neighbor. But you really have to have that stuff documented and make sure you put them on notice ahead of time. And most people don't do that. So
that makes sense, but it's good to know. I mean, I think that, every time you claim it, you put insurance claim on it, I'm sure that you can increase your coverage.
Yeah, it can, some companies do charge if you put in a claim, and some don't. So they all handle it a little differently, but general rule of thumb, you can expect to see a little bit of an increase if you put in a claim. And back to the tree question, if your neighbor's tree limbs are overhanging onto your property, you can trim them.
So you don't even have to ask for permission.
They're on your property.
That's true. Whitney, this is all really, really helpful information. And, you know, there's some of the nuances that we probably don't know. And our clients, you know, probably should know. And so thank you so much for your time. And you can actually share your information, your email address, your phone number, and, you know, and so we can actually get in touch with you if our clients have any questions, or they can get in touch with you directly.
Yeah, thank you so much, Simon. I'm putting my email and my cell phone number in the chat. So cell phone's usually the best way to reach me. I'm always checking my email. And if you guys, if anything comes to mind that, you know, maybe you didn't think of now that you think of later, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to have a conversation.
Thank you. This is so helpful.
Thank you guys so much.
You might just want to say that on this on the screen recording, so if they can actually if people can just write down a phone number.
Okay.
So Whitney information is Whitney, you know, it's Whitney at whwhitney.com. And her phone number, best number is 201-259-7683. Is that correct, Whitney?
Yep. So it's Roddy, RODDY at whroddy.com.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See you later.
Bye.